I laid out my composition with the vine charcoal, so just really lightly. You don't need to use the vine charcoal, you could use the pastel to do that. But I thought it'd be good just to have the whole thing on there, so I know where everything is going to be. I already didn't do thumbnails first, so I already changed some of the composition around a little bit. We are going to be taking that out probably as we work with it. If you can keep the vine charcoal light enough at the start, it won't impact the color too much, but you don't want a ton of vine charcoal on here, and you don't want to do any shading with the vine charcoal. Everything is going to be the pastel. So I've got a variety of different colored objects, and I've got a green fabric background, and then I've got that sort of reddish brown ceramic vase, and so all those things are going to have their own sequence of color. The thing you're going to need to remember about color that we talked about with our color lecture is knowing what the complement of each one of those colors is going to be, because it's going to play into what you do with value. Okay, so it doesn't really matter what I start with as far as showing you these objects, but I probably want to get something on this first, and then I'll probably move to this, and I'll start probably putting the space, the green that's on the surface plane, probably be putting that in there relatively soon, because you want to be able to see all the colors next to the color that it's next to, so that because that's going to impact how you're seeing the color. Okay. The other thing you need to remember from the color lecture is the cooler version of the color. So we're gonna go from, and it's the same way with oil painting. You go from dark to light. So we're going to start off with darker, cooler versions of the color to start, get progressively warmer, progressively lighter as we go. Okay. So the vase, you might think that you want something like this, which is the red. Reddish brown pastel, and you are going to want that burnt sienna after you laid out the darker brown. So I'm thinking probably burnt umber, and I say I'm thinking because sometimes I'll put something down and go, no, that ain't gonna work. So I'm going to concentrate pretty much on this part rather than maybe I'll do the whole thing, whatever. So I'm just putting this down lightly using. You could use the side. I kind of like having them wrapped though, because it keeps them clean and it keeps my hands clean. You're going to find out that's an issue as you're working. I don't need to be too careful at this stage about holding on to the contours, because we are going to be, getting everything. Everything is going to be covered. So those of you in the charcoal drawing that tried to get away with leaving a lot of gray paper, that ain't happening in this. Okay. This isn't the steel gray actually that I have. This is I don't know what gray it is. It's a slightly warmer gray than the steel gray. Steel gray probably would look better. I'm just doing single direction hatching because you're going to see I'm gonna be moving this around a little bit once I get it on here. And I'm on the smooth side of the paper. You can also do it on the rough side, especially when you're using these softer pastels. I'm going to do a little Zoom lecture where I talk about the difference. So I have a couple of examples that I did earlier, that one was on the rough side and one was on the smooth side. You guys excited about doing color finally? So if you like this assignment and you like the assignments that come after this, then I would say sign up for painting. I can do that too, but I don't want to get myself confused. I'm going to start off with this. Now, we talked about the complements. So the thing that's going to happen in the shadow is we're going to be using a blue to start. Eventually we're going to be doing more form following. Looking at the still life, I'm blurring my vision just so I can see the values simplified. Some of you got yourselves confused as we were working on the value because you had color in front of you, right? So the color was getting in the way of how you were interpreting the value. Okay, now the fun part. So you're going to get to move this around, smooth it out a little bit. When we do that, you can see what happens. It makes it blurrier, for sure. Also makes the layer thinner. And the big thing about doing this, because I don't ever let people do this with charcoal drawing, but it's kind of a thing with the pastel, you have to be aware of what finger's doing what. It's always that's a good rule in life, isn't it? What finger's doing what? Because you can get that on your fingers, and then if you take that color, which you don't need, in something else, you're going to be upset. So it's good to have a little piece of tissue, right, that you can just wipe your fingers off as best you can. Also to wipe the pastels off. Okay, so now we're going to want to see what is it going to look like with that warmer red on top. Let's just see what that looks like if we mix it up with the blue. You can see that it's still, it's really keeping that pretty muted, right? So this can actually go over the whole thing if we want to. I'm not going to get too much more as far as layers on the shadow side. The good rule of thumb with painting is that your shadows remain thin, lights get thicker, and then it's going to be similar with this. And I'm doing more of the form following, both directions. Good for a little reflected light over on this side. Okay, so that's just the basic blocking in right now. That you've got major light, major shadow side right now. That's going to change a little bit, a lot more as we progress. But this is just so you can see how it's going to start to get started on that. Probably going to do block in, most of the fruit so that you can, while I'm still talking, I can kind of narrate what's happening, and then after I do that, you're gonna have to kind of follow along with me without talking because it'll be sort of a time lapse thing, right? So you'll get to see. Um, you'll get to see that speed it up. Okay. All right. So the thing about yellows, especially when we're dealing with yellows and grays, you want to have, like, you might think of looking at that yellow that it might be something close to these two, where this is a light, the light yellow, and this one is a yellow ochre, right? But when we're dealing with the shadow on something that's yellow, the tendency to happen is that you are going to, you can end up with a yellow looking gray. So you want to go warmer, well, cooler, technically, with the color first. So we're going to take an orange on here, light, to begin with, spread that around, and then we're going to put the yellows on top, okay? So like a banana, a lemon. On this I do, because I'm using the yellow, I want to take out as much of the fine charcoal as I can. So I'm dabbing that. You can use this to take off the charcoal too, the pastel. Now, if I were on the rougher side, the texture of that paper would be showing up a lot more. So I'm going to do the deep yellow now on top. On the shadow side, I'm going to be putting probably a light, it's kind of a grayish violet. Oh, there it is. Okay, so I'm going to put this on top of that. I'm still going kind of light on it. And you're thinking, I can hear you, that looks really dark. it to sort of neutralize what's going to go on top of the yellow. Because remember, the violet is going to be the complement. That's on yellow. Now you don't need to worry about like, oh, I put the wrong color down on there. Like I said, this is pretty forgiving. When we're blending even, we want to blend in the form following. Now we're going to go to a lighter yellow. And that's a pretty pale yellow, so we can get away with something even lighter than this. Especially where we're going to have those highlights. Well, let's see. Let's see what that looks like. This is kind of a yellow-green, so we want to... Yeah, you know what? That works. If you were in class with me while we were doing this, the thing that happens, a lot is that I get students will say, "Well, how do I do that? How do I get what color? What color do I use to get that?" And the answers that I always give them, I think they don't like them because they're kind of ambiguous. But I say, well, yeah, let's try it. Because, a lot of times, in theory, something is supposed to work and then you see it on there and it doesn't work. Or something you don't think is going to work and then ends up working. So you kind of want to experiment a little bit. I mean, the idea here is that we're supposed to be learning, right? Okay, so we've got the basic light and shadow on that. I'll go ahead and do the orange, and then I'll do the apple's fairly straightforward, but the pomegranate is going to be fun. So I'm gonna show you that, and you'll be shocked what goes on with the pomegranate. But the orange, let's go ahead and go warm first. Cooler first, sorry. So I'm going to take what am I calling it? They're calling this permanent red light. Okay, so that's going to go on top of the orange first. Yeah. Let's hit that. Vine charcoal. So let's say you didn't use the vine charcoal, right? What would you have done instead? Well, you could do, a color that's related to the color and put that down. So this is the lighter orange. Like I could have used that to do the initial drawing with it. And that's fine. But I want this on here first. I'm not worried too much about the stem right now, or text or anything like that. Texture's going to happen in here. You can see the edge is starting to get soft on there, and if it were going to stay that way, that would be bad. When people, when I see these up in the display case and stuff, not necessarily my class, but pastel drawings, when they're not gray, is they're all very blurry, so they all kind of look like that at the end. Okay, and we want to make sure that we can get the sharpness in it as we are working. So that we can try that same color that we used there. That look at that. If you look at that, it looks really gray. The thing, and that's good. The thing that you want to have when you're dealing with shadow is you want to have a muted version of the color, right? It's not. So sometimes students the thing that they always go to is brown. Like you don't want to use brown as a shadow color. Even when you're doing a portrait, brown is not a good shadow color. So you want to use the muted version of whatever the flesh tone is. So for this, we could probably use a blue to start. So I'm going to be using ultramarine blue. And then I'm going to hit that again with the orange. So you can start to see there's a shadow happening. And then let's use the yellow on top. Now I'm really getting to the point where I want to see what that green is going to look like. So that's a fairly muted green, but it's also kind of a bluish green. So there's a couple things I can do. I can see what this is going to look like. And I think I want to have that blue or green under there first. So it's going to be really vivid. I mentioned last time, it's true, because I've been doing a few of these. Not a bad idea to wear your masks. I would be wearing one. But I love liberty too much. I'd be wearing one, except I can't talk and you wouldn't be able to hear me. So maybe when I'm not talking, I'll put it on. Okay, so you can see that this green is really vivid, and it's really, really bright. And you can see but you can see how it's impacting the way that we are seeing those two colors now, right? Or even that. So, And it might not be a bad thing to put, as a shadow color into this, just to, mess around and experiment. Now, this on top. Okay, so you can kind of see what's happening there. Now, ultimately, what's going to happen, because I might not be talking then, so I want to say it now, because it's kind of a revelation. What I did, or what was good for having the highlights onto the fabric, I found that a pale pink, the new pastel, the pale pink, actually helps lessen that maybe and get that light so that we get the actual pretty damn close to the values that we're looking at. Why would that work? Well, because as you all know, you're all saying it out loud, I can hear you, that it's because it's the complement, right? So because it's the complement to the green, it helps to make that green a little bit less intense, because the green isn't really vivid. That's the thing about color we talked about. You want to make sure that you're not going too saturated. You want to be able to have the color muted, okay? And so things like where you've got little wrinkles and things in the fabric, that can be achieved. Two creases here. By this lighter, harder pastel. Okay. So that is ultimately what's going to be going on. I'll probably be doing some of that. Well, let's see what this is going to look like as a highlight on this. So you can see how that looks very different than that, right? Just because of what it's on top of. Okay, so I would say it's very unlikely that you would be using ever pure white on the fruit, any of these objects, as a highlight. Even though you might see some pretty light highlights on the objects, and they might feel like they should be white. Chances are they're not. I never let my painting students put a pure white highlight on top of anything. Okay, they've got to get a little bit of whatever the color the highlight is going on top of. I suppose if it's a highlight on a white object, then it would be pure white, but I don't have any white objects, okay? All right, so I want to do the pomegranate while I'm still talking, just so you can see how outrageous this is. So because the pomegranate is a very muted red, okay, it's almost a brown, right? And I might even want to start with the same color that I started there, but I'm gonna start with this green, okay? So I'm gonna put this green down, and it could have been the blue green too, maybe. Sometimes I'll get students in my painting class that they're real intimidated about color. They're really afraid to use color. They're afraid they're going to make a mistake and how to match the color. And I guess that's a healthy fear, but you can't really get yourself into too much trouble with color as long as you remember the complements. So that if something is too something, it's too yellow, it's too green, it's too red, you just add the opposite, right? So that you can neutralize it a little bit. And as long as you remember that, you're good, okay? Now I'm going to go to a cooler red. And we're going to see what that looks like on top of here. And I may still need to put more of the green on. But we'll see. Oh, I didn't mention this. Notice I taped the edges down, right? So I've got a little margin here on the paper. You're only required to do a half sheet of the Canson. I found that if you fold that Canson paper in half, you're fighting against that fold. So it's best if you cut it and then mount it flat onto the. So you can see this is getting to be a nice sort of muted pomegranate color. Okay, it might need to be darker still in here, probably does, but you can see that that's a good base color for the pomegranate. Okay, and we're probably going to see. I could have, in fact, should have gone ahead and done the green here. I'm going to want to do a cast shadow for you guys too while you're listening to me. There's the problem with the tape though. I reckon it's probably going to take you about however many hours we have in a week to do this, so. I mean, I'm making a lot of progress right now, but the fine tuning of this is going to be where we're going to run into time. The cast shadows aren't all that dark. Into trouble with that, okay? So the best thing to do is to get the little stomp, okay, and try to mix that in with some of that stuff you put down before. So it might be that we're going to take that purple again and put it on top of this just to lessen it. Because in the shadow, it's never going to be just one thing, right? It's never going to be just one value. Shadows tendency to be cool, so you don't want to do a warm shadow. The other thing we can try is a darker gray. What are they calling this? They're calling this mouse gray, I guess. Has about the same value as the violet, so I don't know that it's an improvement. A lot of times though, what'll happen is a contrast between the shadow and the lighter areas, right? So that as we make this lighter, then that shadow, that cast shadow stands out a lot more, okay? Okay, so we've got the basics as far as the layout of our values. I've got the green is going to be coming up to about here because we've got the drapery set up that way. So coming up over to there, and then in the back we've got a very it's actually darker than what's going on in here. So let's experiment with that before it's close in value to this, right? But maybe a little bit darker than that. So let's go ahead and see. This is that purple color that I'm getting quite enamored with. So that, as far as a color for the negative space, it fills the bill as far as being cool. It's too saturated though, okay? So what we want to do is we want to knock that back. So the complement, right? This is definitely too light, but when we see it mixed together, it starts to read then as a gray, okay? Which is what we want to have happen. What would a regular gray look like? Let's see. So this is our mouse gray again. This is a blue gray. That would work too, right? And then the blue gray, you'd probably want to mix some orange with that. You wouldn't do this, these two things right next to each other. We're probably going to take one out and decide on what we're going to use. I'm just showing you what are some of the options. So I mean, if you see that by itself, it's kind of a neutral. then that is a white on top of that. We wanted to make it seem even more gray, right? But even though it's neutral on its own, and then you have that neutral, you can tell the difference between those two things. And so that is probably going to be something that would stand out. So that's why you're going to want to make a decision on which one you want to do. I actually kind of like that. Okay, I think that one might be the one I'm going to go with, even though I've got more of the other one. So that's thin enough that I could probably go on top of what I have there without having to take it off, but we'll see. You'll see. Okay, so that's the basic beginning. Okay, and you can see that I did all of this in a relatively quick amount of time. But we are going to start to develop this, and you'll be seeing me, I'll try to remember to show you what I'm putting in. But at the beginning stages, for the most part, it's been all of the softer pastels, the Rembrandt, the softer ones. But as we go, we will do the harder ones. Like I said, you can do the whole thing with the harder pastels. It's not that big of a deal. It's going to take longer because they're harder. The color doesn't spread out as fast. So that's going to be the sort of the issue that you're dealing with there. Okay. So I'll be quiet now, and you will get to see this progress. So I don't know if I'm going to finish the whole thing in this first go, but probably not. But you'll get to see it. The objects developed a lot more than they are right now.